So we're going to start slowly but surely. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our EDI workshop on mental health in highly performant environments. My name is Marilou Dodi. I'm the Senior Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisor at the D2R Initiative at McGill University, and I'm very glad to be hosting this important conversation with you all today. Before we go further, I would like to share that I use the pronouns she and her, sharing the pronouns that we refer to in email signatures, LinkedIn titles, or when we speak at events like today, are all ways to normalize gender diversity and the fact that our physical appearance does not necessarily determine the gender that we identify with. I would also like to share that I appear on the screen as a Black woman wearing a scarf and a turtleneck. And to share what we look like on the screen offers a more inclusive experience for people with visual impairment. I would also like to share that the Detour Initiative at McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. Sharing this land acknowledgement is particularly important in an event like today because D2R is engaged with Indigenous health research. We have invested in health and Indigenous health research, and we have Indigenous representation in our governance, and also an associate director in Indigenous health research at the center of our D2R activities. As we all know, Indigenous communities face many challenges, including mental health issues that are due to our history of colonization. Therefore, my colleague Loretta Loon, D2R Associate Director in Indigenous Health uh, Research, and me invite you to meaningfully think about the importance of prevention and allyship for Indigenous mental health during this presentation. Please note that this workshop is being recorded and might be shared on our D2R YouTube page. A quick note on D2R for those of you who might not know about D2R. So, D2R is an initiative at McGill University that has the vision to deliver genomic based RNA therapies to benefit the health of different populations affected by infectious, rare, neglected diseases, chronic diseases like cancer, or even cardiovascular and cardiometabolic diseases. To fulfill our vision, what we do, we have funding opportunities for trainees, for professors. We also have different that we offer to our community, such as training programs, industry liaison activities, data science activities, and also EDI initiatives. So in my role, I have the privilege of leading the development and implementation of the EDI action plan that we have at D2R. And we have three main focus areas to do so. The first focus area is on supporting the progression of equity deserving groups in genomic based RNA therapeutics research. So, for instance, we have currently for Black undergraduate students internship opportunities. We offer 15 weeks paid by D2R. So, if you know anyone that might want to join, do not hesitate. We also have dynamic communities of practices for professors, research staff, and also students. So, these communities of practices were not only speaking to each other, but we're really hands-on on work to do. So if ever you want to join them, do not hesitate and do not hesitate to contact me. Also, our second focus area is about applying EDI in research funding practices. So that means that we integrate EDI requirements, review processes, and reporting for all of the D2R research funded projects. And we also have a last focus area, which is about understanding EDI challenges and opportunities in genomic based RNA therapeutics. So, for instance, we have actions like focus groups, engagement sessions. If you want to be part of that, they'll be happening in February next year. So don't hesitate. We have climate surveys, training, and awareness activities like the one that we're having today. So that's exactly why we're meeting today. Today we're gathering because December 3rd was chosen by the United Nations to celebrate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. This day is about promoting the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities at every level of society and development, and to raise also awareness of the situation of persons with disabilities. Last year, D2R contributed to that day by simply having a social media post, but this year we're going further than that. After meeting with one one-on-one with professors around D2R, we have really seen the need to know how to support and interact with research team members that have mental health challenges. Therefore, we decided to tackle this issue by having this conversation. And with no further ado, I would like us to meet our great speakers. So, if you can please introduce yourselves and why this topic is important to you. I'm gonna name you on the screen as I see you. It's not a preference order. So, Viviana, do you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Detour and Marilou, for this invitation. So I'm Bibiana Pulido. I'm director of a nonprofit, really small nonprofit that was initially created in universities, which is called the Quebec Inter-University Network. Now it's gone a bit larger, and there's other institutions from private to public and nonprofit that it could, you know, could be with us and participate to our activities. So I think it's really important to talk about mental health, especially in academia, because it stays like a taboo. And we have to acknowledge that there's people that struggle with mental health, and it concerns everyone now. You know, you could have permanent, but you could also have episodic mental health problems. And I think a lot of people could relate to that. And in regarding of the theme today, you know, universities, academia has a very performative culture, and you know, it's there's so many people gravitating in this ecosystem, like employees, researchers, professors that have lived with health problems, mental health problems, but you know, that are still living with mental health problems. We could talk about, you know, anxiety, stress, burnout, and so on, and we could even talk about suicide. You know, so it's something that we don't like to talk about, but there is cases of suicide in our universities, and we could talk about discrimination related to disability, you know, ableism, and you know, there's discrimination, but people could also internalize, you know, as being weak, unproductive, unfit, and you know, they always have the constant pressure to prove themselves. And well, yeah, well, the idea today, it's important for us to have this discussion because we need this cultural shift where we promote the well-being of everyone because it concerns everyone, and you know that we stimulate a caring culture in our organization, research teams, and it's important to prevent. You know, sometimes we're going to deal with the problem after the person has a mental health problem, but prevention is the key. So yeah, and it's related to with our work in equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Bibiana. I'm so excited to hear you for our conversation that we'll have in a few minutes. And Tara.
Great. Thank you very much. I wanted to thank you, Mary Lou, as well as D2R. I also wanted to mention that I'm coming to you today from unceded Mohawk territory. And I wanted to wish everybody first a happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I think it's absolutely crucial that we ponder the mandate of nothing about us without us, as well as highlighting the lived experience of people with disabilities. I am an associate professor and chair of the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology. We have a master's program in inclusive education. I have worked for 30 years in the disability field and inclusive education, and I'm the director of a research group called SPARC, Social Policy Advocacy Research Community, of students from a variety of equity-seeking groups. Over the years, I've graduated 55 students at this point, master's and PhD level, and I've always had an inclusive approach to my research. And so more than 50% have been from equity seeking groups, including students with disabilities. So I'm very happy to talk about attracting diverse students and creating an inclusive space for them.
Thank you so much, Tara. We're so lucky to have you both on this panel. So, Just a few logistical points for the audience. So we're going to have a little conversation between the three of us for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to a Q&A. But so you don't forget about your questions as we go, please put them in the Q&A so we could look at them afterwards. And you'll have the opportunity afterwards if you want to open your camera, you could speak to each other. It's going to be a very interactive portion after that. So our conversation will be in two blocks. First, we will address the current state of mental health in research environments. And second, we will speak about the assessment, prevention, and allyship. So for the first section on the state of mental health in in research environments, um, I would like us to really start by the basics. So words are important to make sure that we know what we're talking about. Tara, can you please explain to us what is a mental disorder and what is mental health?
Yes, absolutely. So it's key to be thinking about the language we use, to not be using ableist and non-inclusive language. So to be able to reflect on that, I think is a great way to be able to start. When we're talking about these concepts, so mental health is our umbrella term, really referring to overall emotional, psychological, social well-being. It really impacts our day to day, how we feel, how we think, how we behave, and good mental health really helps us to be able to cope with stress, the kinds of stress that are daily stress, maintaining relationships, and to be able to engage in making decisions effectively. Just to offer an example also of a typical kind of stress, let's say feeling stressed about a deadline, this kind of thing we experience daily for many of us on this call. And if you still manage to function very well, manage to be able to have your emotions be regulated, maintain your relationships during this kind of stress, this is an indicator of overall mental health well-being. When we're talking about mental health conditions, on the other hand, here we're talking about clinically based diagnoses. You are going to be interacting with a professional who engages in diagnostics. And some examples there are, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. But there's many to choose from. And I also wanted to highlight with these concepts some of the considerations for research supervisors or for professors thinking about mental health as a part of academic success. It's certainly a piece that we live with every day. Being able to think about how to create supportive environments, being cognizant of some of the warning signs that somebody might not be doing well. I think many people are coming into to their studies already in survival mode. We are dealing with a lot of very complex issues in the world, and I think we need to be cognizant of where people are coming from, thinking about how we can promote a work-life balance, and asking ourselves the question about mental wellness and going on that journey to improve that, to serve as a model for our students. And really importantly, in that distinction is knowing your limits. So the distinction between being a leader, a supporter, an ally, and a professional who would be engaging in more of the diagnoses and interacting with mental health conditions. There's a fine line there.
Thank you so much. And we'll have the opportunity to speak about something that you mentioned, like warning signs, in the second portion of our conversation, because I think it's so important to pay attention to these things. Now I'd like us to really look at the link between We're talking about an EDI because we're having this in the context of an EDI conversation. So, Bibiana, I know that some people may not clearly be seeing the link between mental health and EDI. However, you and many other EDI specialists work on mental health as part of their work. So, can you please share your vision of why mental health is important to work on if we truly want to create equitable and inclusive working spaces?
Well, thank you. I kind of mentioned it before, but I think when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we want to make sure that everybody, all the equity-seeking groups, but also, and not only the equity seeking or deserving groups are included and they feel well. Tara talked about mental wellness. Well, mental wellness is quite important when we want to, succeed. We want to will feel included in academia in our universities, in our research teams, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure, and we have to take that into account. And we have to make sure, to care for people and see, okay, what could I do for this person? How could I help out in order that everybody is including? So yeah, sometimes we don't see the link between that, but there's a lot that we do in EDI for the wellness of all people in our organization. So it's really important to do it. However, I have to mention that, for example, for me, I'm not necessarily the expert on mental health problems. So why it's important also to go reach out with people that have the expertise. There's organizations that work on that, even in our institutions like universities. There is like accessibility advisors, there are student advisors, and it's important to reach out to the people that really have the expertise, because as a professional EDI, you can't be an expert on everything. So yeah, so reach out. I'll mention it too, but it's important to work with the people that have the expertise related to mental health problems.
Totally. And as you're saying that, she could not be here today because today is a big day for her. But we have an accessibility advisor. Her name is Catherine Roy. For those who don't know her, you could reach out to her if you have any needs. She's a very great resource. And maybe to circle back on the important work that you did around mental health, Bibiana, you held a role on supporting the Fonds de recherche du Québec, so the FRQ, earlier this year with a consultation with persons living with disabilities. The goal of that consultation was to help build an accessibility action plan. So, in that work, I know that you came across some very interesting data on the current state of mental health in research environments in Quebec. So, can you please share some of that data with us?
Sure, sure. So as you mentioned, we were mandated from the Fonds de Recherche Québec to conduct a consultation with members of the post-secondary research community that have disabilities, and we had the participation of about 26 persons, in the province. From the research community, we had students, researchers, professors, and we did have people that had permanent but also episodic mental health problems. So the objectives of that consultation was initially to, identify the barriers and the challenges that people with disabilities have in accessing, funding with granting agencies, for example, access to information, platform accessibility, the program rules. And it was also to develop potential solutions that could help reduce these barriers through the action plan that needed to be built. Um, and to prepare that consultation, we looked at what other funding agencies did. So, for example, we went to look at what Canadian Institute of Health Research did for their consultation in order to build their accessibility plan for 223 and 226. And what came out of that consultation was interesting. So when they related to quantitative data, when people identify themselves, well, it wasn't necessarily the right portray of what people with disabilities people in academia with disabilities because there's still the stigma, you don't want to identify as a person with disabilities because, you could see a possible negative consequences that you could live. So that's why the qualitative part of the consultation was also important for them and for us, to really understand what our colleagues live. Um, the Canadian Institutes of Health also mentioned that individuals that disclose their disability, well, they lacked of support, and also they discouraged some people to continue in academia. And it's also mentioned that especially in the field of STEM. So they identified barriers like the lack of awareness, understanding of how work-related practices impact persons with disabilities. Also, there's a limited understanding of the scope and benefits of being a fully accessible organization, and a limited consideration of accessibility in organizing and planning resource allocation. And therefore, we came back to our consultation and we had similar results related to the barriers. But what came out was all this meritocracy, excellence in research, and research not being necessarily inclusive. And it's also perceived as is excellence in research is favoring a certain type of person, and disadvantages equity-seeking groups because there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of anxiety to perform, to publish, to get a position. So meritocracy excellence came a lot. Um, Also, what came is the lack of attention of the specific needs of a person with disabilities. Um, a lot of people mentioned there's no one fits all model. It's important, to consider specific needs and give an adapted support or accommodation. And many outlined that there's a lack of knowledge and experience on how to structure a funding project to the granted agencies. We saw a lot of students, even researchers, that live quite a lot of stress and anxiety in building these funding projects. And just for a little mention, if you haven't seen it, it was published in social media, I think 2 days ago, l'Observatoire sur la santé mentale en enseignement supérieur at Université Sherbrooke, came out with a report related to students. And they did come with interesting results. You could go see it, but it's interesting to see that one of the highlights of well, not the highlight, but an important thing that came out, COVID had an impact on mental health of a lot of students. But we came back in a situation that is, would say, more normal. But the results show that after COVID, the mental health situation has deteriorated for students. So a lot of students from equity-seeking groups do struggle with a lot of mental health problems. So that's more or less what we did with FRQ and the link we managed to have with other funding agencies, and also what just came out a few days ago.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Viviana. And I think we're having this conversation in a very timely manner because what you're saying is really what the profs around U2R has been saying, right? They notice that the mental health of their students is worse than before. They want to see ways to support. So when you're saying, okay, there's a lack of support, there's discouragement. So how do we position ourselves to make sure that we're not making things worse in that way while we're seeing that's happening around us? So I think Miguel has done some work, some important work to address these things. I spoke to you earlier about the work that our colleague Catherine Roy did, but there's also the work that you've been doing, Tara. You've been part of the McGill Joint Board. There has been a subcommittee, an equity subcommittee on persons with disabilities, and that subcommittee had the role, right, to invest in recommending university policy and in promoting more inclusiveness at McGill. So I'm curious to know if you see any relations with what Bibiana just mentioned in terms of in our highly performant environments, such as our research labs, our classrooms, or even in the context of administrative roles. And also, another part of the question, I would like to know, I'm curious if you could share some of the recommendations that you worked on with that subcommittee with the rest of the audience.
Sure, thanks very much. Yes, absolutely. There are many links between those data that were presented and particularly the lived experience of those on the committee. It was really important on the committee to have representation from equity-seeking groups, to be engaging in a co-construction process, and really putting into action the nothing about us without us approach that was highlighted by the UN's CRPD. The issue that Bibiana mentioned about the stress around disclosure, the narrative around excellence, this sort of nebulous idea that comes with many different stereotypes, unfortunately, exacerbating some of those stereotypes due to focusing on meritocracy and a view that the disabled community, disability community, wouldn't be able to match the same level of excellence, or if they required accommodations, that these would inevitably mean that you're not meeting a certain standard. So the issue of disclosure was a big one, as was the discussion of the various barriers, and those were exacerbated by the stress that highly performant environments really do create. And we talked about different ways of ensuring that we could reduce some of those barriers. Some of the evidence-based approaches to that are adopting a universal design for learning approach, which focuses on accessibility for all. This is a proactive approach as well. Making sure that there's training for supervisors and stakeholders around mental health, as well as accessibility, having a transparent accommodations process, and this clarity really helps to address some of the stress also, so people are aware of the steps, the supports that are made available to them. And once this becomes transparent, it also helps to destigmatize the process as well. And thinking about workload and culture adjustments. So we had many conversations over the 7 years that I was engaged in that process around ensuring that there are supports, there are connections, community building, all really important pieces. So if we're thinking about this from a research context, also, this would look like ensuring that our lab spaces and research tools are physically accessible, protocols and different formats are used to ensure that different modalities are covered, to make sure that there's accessibility, again, for all. Supervisors recognizing signs of distress, and understanding the accommodation process, making that clear from the start also. So as I mentioned with my research group, I have a philosophy of inclusion to start, and I make that clear. So students, when they come in or when they apply, there's a different sense and an openness for disclosure if that is something that people are comfortable with, but knowing that they're coming into a space where accessibility has been considered from the start as part of the design, and that diversity is valued. So those things right from the start. And the transparent accommodation process is a part of that I think from a research standpoint can can really help to reduce some of those barriers. And as you mentioned, Marie-Lou, the actions that had been taken by McGill over the last decade have really made a significant impact. There's been a lot of improvement. I think there's a lot for us to be proud of, with the recognition, of course, that there's still a lot to do.
Thank you so much, Tara. You mentioned a lot of important things. For those who may not know about the Universal Design for Learning, I think it's such an important strategy as people have different ways of expressing what they know, what they understand. So if ever you need more information about that, I invite you to go learn more about this. It's so important. You mentioned different things such as making the spaces more inclusive from the start. So in my one-on-one conversations with professors, we've been talking a lot about that, how to make the research environments open from the beginning. Also, I think that's an important part of inclusion. So I think what we're doing is like really part of this vision. And you mentioned community building. So I think D2R is a new initiative. We're starting to see community. I'm seeing some people that come to different events more and more. So to really build that around us, to not be afraid to have these conversations between us, I think is so important. So it's nice to see that the conversations that we're having at D2R are part of that vision, the recommendations that you've been having as well. So thank you for sharing that, Tara. And maybe a last question to close this first part of the conversation. Bibiana, we often speak about intersectionality when we speak about EDI, and I think that topic is no different. We should speak about intersectionality around mental health as well. So can you please share with us shortly what that means and why it is important to address it in that context?
Yeah, well, really shortly, intersectionality refers that it's a framework, and a lot of researchers, professors have worked on that, and um, yeah, so it actually explains the different social identities related, for example, to gender, race, disability, class, that interact and overlap the shape of people's experiences. And if we come to the intersectionality related to mental health, and if I come back to the report that came out of the Observatoire, the ESME, one of they also outline, and it's related to intersectionality, is the financial precarity of students. So if you're dealing with important financial stress, it is more likely that you will have anxiety or depression. So, it's related to financial situation, and yeah, the different barriers that you could have, and the symptoms that it could lead to more anxiety and depression. Um, Students, if we just take students with disabilities, like I mentioned for the FRQ, there's a lot of them that do have mental health problems. They struggle with that. And the report also mentions that students from the LGBTQ2S plus community are more likely to have more symptoms of mental health problems like anxiety and depression. So it kind of shows that the identities of everyone are unique, but some people struggle more, some people are more privileged. But when you have a lot of a lot of barriers, a lot of difficult situations, that overlap, well, it does bring mental health issues, how would I say, more negative. So yeah, basically it's that.
Thank you so much. And in terms of like maybe genomic-based RNA therapeutics research, we speak a lot about the social determinants of health. So those can be also taken in consideration to understand how they could affect also mental health when we think about the financial situation, like Bibiana just mentioned, or when we think about different realities, like the geographical space where someone is, different things like that are important to take into consideration. So now I'm sure that you are excited to hear our speakers about how, like like what to do on the ground when that happens. So to speak about assessment, prevention, and allyship, I'd invite you, Tara, to maybe start that second segment of the conversation by addressing what are some resources for people that think they might have a mental health condition. What can they use on themselves to see that?
Sure, thanks very much. So this piece for me really came to be with looking around in my class and really noticing, as Bibiana mentioned earlier, that my students didn't seem to be okay. There really seemed to be many issues that students were dealing with, and I wanted to be able to engage in this conversation and have students be empowered to think about self-assessment. So in my class, I created an Am I Okay informal questionnaire, not about diagnosis, but really providing a tool, and there are many self-assessment tools available. Um, but I really wanted to give students the opportunity to think through some of the mental wellness pieces. And as I mentioned, many are coming having a lot of additional stress, coming already in survival mode, and all of the stress that compiles just serves to exacerbate the situation and cause more barriers. So I created this informal assessment in my class where I was asking questions just about general mental wellness. How am I doing in general? What are the signs that I am feeling okay? So, looking at these physical, emotional, and behavioral indicators of their mental wellness. What are the signs that I'm not doing well? Identifying stress responses too, the 4 Fs, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. I also wanted to have students be attuned to the things that have promoted their mental well-being in the past. So I asked them what helped me feel well in the past, um, have provide examples, mood boosters, social support, connecting to movies, music, moving your body, all of those kinds of pieces that could be helpful. I also highlighted the mental health resources that were available to them because I feel like that's very important. And again, at McGill, we have many. And and then I asked a question to ensure that students would reach out. So if at the end of this self-assessment they felt that there was a reason to engage another level of professional in this, to reach out about that. I made it very clear that I wasn't looking to have any disclosures or to engage with specifics, but to have students assess and for me to be able to provide a bit of a scaffolding to help them go further. I also incidentally feel that this is a great opportunity for supervisors to be thinking about this for themselves and this way to help provide a model as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Mental health can affect anyone, as I had like this request by professors, but I think professors also should take care of themselves. So that's super important that you mentioned the supervisor piece. And where do we draw the line, Tara, between what is left to a mental health professional to do versus what we can do as an ally?
Yes, absolutely. So, as an ally, I want you to be thinking about yourself as a support person, supporting the human rights of the person who's coming to you as well. I think that that is key. So, being able to listen without judgment, so address any of stereotypes, the programming maybe that you kind of had experienced leading to stigma, things like that. Being able to notice changes, so observing your students, yourself, making sure that you can share resources, be aware of what these resources are, inform yourself, take the workshops that are available. Obviously, everybody on the call here today is actively engaging in that. Encourage uh, being able to reach out for support. You can model that as well. But that line is very clear between allyship and professional engagement when you're talking about things like formal assessments, diagnoses, and treatments. Um, Anything where you're providing therapy, medication, crisis intervention. These are places where absolutely this is a different lane than your lane as an ally, and making sure that you are very clear about that distinction, I think, is of utmost importance, particularly around supporting people's human rights and their medical and other information.
Thank you, Tara. I think that might help some people that might have like some um imposter syndrome of saying, can I just ask someone if they're okay? Can I like support that person? So I think what you mentioned is very important. We want to make sure that we're not diagnosing anyone, that we're not giving like prescriptions on what to do. So thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned, okay, when people come to us and share that they are living with a mental health condition, what should we do and what should we not do? I'm asking this question to you both, so I don't know who wants to go first.
I could go. No problem. Well, if somebody comes and talks to you about their mental health, it's because they feel comfortable, they know they could talk to someone. So that's really important. I mean, when somebody come and talks to you about, really profound problems, I think that's encouraging. However, it's confidential. So you can't go everywhere telling, oh, this person has, for example, a depression, a burnout, unless the person really wants you to communicate some information, for example, for a professor, uh, uh, anyone that they feel they need that the information is given. I think one of the main things, and I've mentioned it before, is just ask the person what kind of support they need. To listen and to ask what do you need, and then you're able to give like the different resources because a lot of students mention, there's like kind of this protocol in university. So you have mental health problems. This is how it works. This is the program, but it's not a one size fits all. It came all the time. Each person deals with mental health problems differently, And Tara mentioned everybody copes differently with, for example, anxiety, depression. And just to outline, I really liked Tara the questionnaire you mentioned. Am I okay? Because when initially you talked about that, you go, oh, okay, I looked at it more like in a non-negative side, but maybe I'm not explaining good, but what I liked about it is that you ask the students, how did you cope when you had a similar situation? What does it make you happy? So there's this positive side that is, I think, really interesting. And we talked about accessibility. One of the main things that students like is to be able to 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 go talk to the people that have a reaching role and that they are listened because they have a really a really important impact. And the fact that having this link like Tara has with the students is so important because they deal with workload, the exams. You talked also, Tara, about work, school, personal life balance. And because of what we're talking to do, we have to perform. In academia, you have to perform. So that's what I would add for the conversation.
And I would just add, I think that's great. We're definitely on the same page. about what to do. So maybe I'll add the what not to do part. So I would ensure not to minimize or dismiss people's lived experiences. I think that's very important. Sometimes to try to provide a solution. Blanket statements are made that can really minimize people's experiences, like everyone feels stress or those kinds of things. Um, don't pry. Don't ask. For more details than the person is coming to talk to you about. Sometimes these questions are invasive questions that don't have a place in this, you know, openness to hearing somebody's story. Um, do not try to diagnose or give therapeutic advice. Those are definitely not in your lane. And make sure that the confidentiality piece is very clear. So you don't share with others the disclosure without consent, and you need to make sure that there's active consent on how to move forward. Um, I think often people have the best of intentions, but sometimes really overstep those lines. So it's very important to think about that um, and stay in that lane and ask for support, ask questions if ever you're in doubt about what your role is in this situation. We have, again, many resources to be able to have wonderful people to consult with about next steps.
Thank you, Tara. I think it's so important what you mentioned in terms of not necessarily prying, asking for more details. I think it's important to take in consideration. Sometimes there's like a power dynamic between the professor and the student, so they could feel a bit distressed by needing to share that information. So, thank you for sharing that. And I know when we were talking to each other before the event of today, you were speaking about narratives that sometimes people hold that maintain that create more mental health issues. So I don't know if you could share with the audience about that as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll quickly give a few of those. I think the one that most people are familiar with is, you know, if if I provide this for one student, everybody is going to ask for this. So this issue of equity, and I like to use the very simple analogy of, eyeglasses or hearing aids, where it's the individual who having access to those things, being able to then engage with the environment uh, doesn't impact others. Another example is a ramp where everybody benefits from that, regardless of individual need. And thinking about some of the other narratives, one of the ones to continue to engage in, um, you know, uh, overloaded workloads and stress as well. I had to suffer through that, so other students should have to suffer as well. And what I would say to people who use that narrative is, I'm very sorry, and you shouldn't have had to suffer through that either. And um, having others continue to suffer doesn't doesn't help us with reparations. And so, that piece is important, I think, to consider. And one of the others is that somebody with a mental health condition is less capable or unreliable, that they're getting, an unfair advantage. Um, and, this idea of toughening up, also some, engaging in microaggressions. Everyone else is stressed. Why can't you handle it? Those kinds of things. In most of my talks, I have a meme that shows up pretty much in everything, also in all of my courses. It's two dogs. There's a golden retriever and a Jack Russell, and the question is, how deep is the mud? So, talking about stress, and the the idea is that you see the mud on the golden retriever goes up to the golden retriever's knees, and to the Jack Russell, it goes up to its chin. And so, it depends on who you ask, because everybody experiences stressors um, and the environment differently, and lived experience is very important. And for us to engage in perspective taking and being able to be open to hear about people's experiences and not making the assumptions that you should you should be handling it in this way, or other people handle it better. So to really think about it from a personal story, and to not make those assumptions.
Thank you so much, Tara. I see the time flying, so I'll open up for the Q&A period. So if anyone wants to ask questions, you can unmute yourself. You can we can see you on the screen if you want. You could type in the chat whatever is more comfortable for you. I had to control myself because with these two, I wanted to speak for like 3 hours. So it was hard for me to just like choose some questions and stay in the time. There is no wrong question. Would it be more comfortable for you if we
The
stop the
chat
recording
is,
at this?
sorry, the
Okay.
chat is actually
Yeah.
disabled.
Oh,
So when
okay.
I click on the chat, I can't actually type anything.
Okay, sorry about that. If ever you want to share your question live, you can do it as well. Oh, it's open now. Thank you to the great D2R comms team for making that happen.
Okay, I guess it still says disabled on my end, but I'll ask a
Okay.
question. So I'm a prof, and I've had my own mental health challenges, and I guess one thing I've struggled with is um, how open to be with my students about my own, partly as a way to try to normalize it and make it okay. But I also don't want to like over disclose, or maybe give them like have them lose respect for me, or something like that. And so that's something that I've sort of struggled with. So I'm wondering how either of you think about that.
Well, maybe I'll jump in quickly. Um, thank you for sharing that. I think number one, that's truly an asset to be able to set up an inclusive experience for students. In terms of the sharing, I think it would be wonderful for students to have access to that information, in terms of thinking about the inclusive environment that that you put forward, in terms of the line between very specific details, things like that. The professional boundaries always are very important. But I think contextualizing that within your philosophy for creating an inclusive space, I think this narrative really only strengthens that, in my view.
Thanks.
And provides a wonderful model for students as well. I think that's the piece that is very clear to students. Often have a hard time finding people with similar lived experience to be able, and examples of success. And so to have that and to be able to share that with them, I think is really a gift.
That's a great question, and it normalizes conversation around this topic that is so taboo, but so important to speak about. Yeah. Bibiana, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the response. Good. I see another question in the chat. Does your institution develop any tools or resources that help support equity, diversity, and inclusion for research students? If you're speaking about D2R ourselves, we are like with the EDI action plan, we have different things that we're doing. We are co-developing with our EDI community of practice for professors one tool. They're putting all together in a document their best EDI practices in research labs where they're really speaking about what they do on a daily basis to have an inclusive environment. That's one of the things that we're working on. Our goal is to have that ready by April. So we're meeting almost on a monthly basis to work on that. So D2R we're relatively new also at D2R, so we're building some things around that. But you should definitely see what McGill does in terms of any support for students. We have the Student Wellness Hub that is a very important resource. We have also the institutional equity team that has different resources. So there's different resources around. So Marie-Claude, I don't know if that answers well to your question. All right, thanks to you. And is there a last question? Oh, thank you. Me to our comms team put the EDI action plan in the chat. So if there's no other question, maybe I have one last question for Bibiana and Tara before we wrap up. Do you have like a final advice for anyone who wants to contribute to making mental health conversations more accessible? Like a final advice, like maybe one thing that you did not mention or one thing that you want really people to carry on after this conversation?
Well, maybe I could go. I could give a true example of what I saw in a big research team. So I don't know how we say it in English, lac à l'épaule, like
A sort of strategic retreat-ish.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they had this strategic retreat with researchers, professors, and also graduate students. And what was interesting is that, they had like conversations, more technical conversations related to their research. But they had a 1 hour and a half session on mental health. Well, in EDI and mental health. And the director was present. And I think what was interesting is that they had this courageous conversations, and it was also kind of a dialogue for the main professor to know what's really going on in the research team and what they struggle, and also to build kind of like because the students, a lot of them struggle with mental health problems, but they never talk about it between them. So now the fact that having that conversation, they're like, oh yeah, I could relate to you. Oh, I do, this is what I did. Oh, this resource. And it kind of built a really nice support from everyone. So I think that was a really good example, and I saw it in my own eyes.
Related to that, mine is a simple one about self-care being community care, for people to be loud and proud about how they take care of themselves, talk to their students, talk to others about that, and that opens the conversation, but also provides really important models for others to engage in important self-care and community benefits.
Thank you so much, Tara and Viviana. I personally feel very energized. I think we have a lot of information to continue this community work around mental health, around the work that we're doing together. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone who participated to this conversation today. And we remain available if ever you need anything. You can find me at marylou.dodier@mcgill.ca. Don't hesitate if you have questions. If you just want to chat, also, it doesn't need to be structured, but if you feel that you want to continue the conversation in any way, don't hesitate. Thank you so much. And I see someone wrote happy holidays in the chat, so we could start the holiday spirit by sharing a happy holiday wishes as well. Thank you.